A quiet town can hide the darkest secrets, and sometimes those secrets sit in plain sight, behind a signboard that promises compassion, dignity, and respect. The case you're about to hear exposes one of the most chilling breaches of trust ever committed by someone responsible for honoring the dead. This isn't just a story of fraud, it is a disturbing descent into deception, betrayal, and the horrifying discovery that changed an entire community forever. Funeral homes are supposed to be sanctuaries, places where grieving families find comfort, closure, and the assurance that their loved ones are cared for with dignity. But for dozens of families, that trust was shattered when a funeral director's long-hidden crimes came to light, revealing a trail of lies deeper and more twisted than anyone could have imagined. This shocking tragedy began unfolding when authorities received multiple complaints from families who noticed something strange: ashes that didn't seem human, urns filled with suspicious materials, and paperwork that felt incomplete or altered. At first, these concerns seemed isolated. A missing document here, a delayed response there. Nothing substantial enough to trigger alarm. But behind those small inconsistencies was a scheme so elaborate, it would take investigators months to unravel it fully. The funeral director at the center of this case, once seen as a respected member of the community, has now pleaded guilty to 35 counts of fraud, a number that only hints at the scale of betrayal. For years, he presented himself as a professional who understood the weight of grieving families' emotions. He promised respect. He promised care. He promised dignity. But instead, he delivered deceit. Authorities launched an investigation after several families reported receiving remains in urns that seemed suspiciously light. Others claimed that the ashes were coarse, gritty, and unlike what they had received in past cremations. These unsettling details opened the door to a much bigger discovery. When investigators finally entered the premises, they were met with something unimaginable: human remains stored improperly, scattered across areas not meant for preservation, and in some cases, left in conditions that no family would ever accept. This discovery marked the beginning of one of the most disturbing fraud cases in recent memory. The fraud wasn't just financial. It wasn't just about money. It involved emotional destruction. Families thinking they were laying their loved ones to rest peacefully, when in reality, the remains they received weren't even their family members. Some urns didn't contain human ashes at all. Instead, they held materials that investigators later identified as construction debris, wood ash, or a mixture of unidentified substances. Each new revelation intensified the horror. The prosecutor described the case as a systematic abuse of trust, noting that the funeral director had deceived grieving families who were emotionally vulnerable and relying on him during the darkest moments of their lives. These families paid for cremations, embalming procedures, funeral services, and proper handling of remains. But instead, they received lies wrapped in official-looking documents. As the investigation continued, a pattern emerged. Services were either never performed, partially completed, or done in shocking disregard for professional standards. In several cases, families were told that cremation had already taken place when, in fact, the bodies were still present on the property in unsafe and unacceptable conditions. The community was shaken to its core. Families gathered outside the funeral home as authorities removed evidence. Some cried. Some were in disbelief. Others simply stood in silence, unable to process the fact that their loved ones had been treated with such disregard. A place meant to be a safe haven had turned into a house of horrors. When the case reached court, the funeral director initially denied any wrongdoing. But as evidence piled up, documents, testimonies, forensic reports, he eventually had no way out. He pleaded guilty to 35 counts of fraud, accepting responsibility for a scheme that spanned years. During sentencing, the judge emphasized the emotional pain inflicted upon families, stating that the crime was not just fraud, it was a violation of humanity. The courtroom heard statements from victims who described how the betrayal reopened wounds they thought had healed. Many said they struggled to visit their loved ones' resting places, unsure of what had actually happened to the remains. Some families are still waiting for answers. Even after the guilty plea, forensic teams continue working to match remains found at the premises with the families affected. This process is long and complex, and for many, closure may take months, or might never truly arrive. Experts in the funeral industry have highlighted that incidents like this, though rare, reveal a vulnerable side of a profession built on trust. It raises questions about oversight, licensing, and the need for stronger regulations to prevent similar tragedies in the future. But above all, this case stands as a painful reminder of how deeply fraud can cut when it targets people in grief. Money can be recovered, but the emotional damage? That lingers. The guilty plea may bring a degree of justice, but for the victims, the pain of knowing their loved ones were treated with disrespect cannot be undone. Many families have filed civil lawsuits demanding accountability and compensation for the emotional trauma they suffered. As the community attempts to move forward, the memory of this case remains heavy. It's a story of betrayal so disturbing that it forces us to question how someone entrusted with such a sacred responsibility could be capable of such cruelty. And while the truth has now been exposed, the emotional scars will remain, etched forever in the hearts of those who thought they were giving their loved ones a peaceful farewell.